Sorry, I had to stop my previous recording, so I will continue with the Thought You Setter's cure. Then Mrs. Burbank called Mrs. Teagle. She told her all about the Thought You Said-itis and asked if she had had any similar experience with Terry or Teresa. Mrs. Teagle said, "Oh, no, Mrs. Burbank. You see, we have always studied correct speech and we all speak correctly. The children always pronounce all their vowels and all their consonants, and therefore we never have any trouble understanding each other. Perhaps the trouble lies with you and Mr. Burbank. Perhaps you do not speak distinctly. Perhaps the poor little children cannot understand you. I am holding little speech classes every afternoon, and if you and Mr. Burbank are interested, I would be glad to have you attend. I wouldn't care to have the children because I was afraid they might corrupt my children's perfect speech." Mrs. Burbank thanked Mrs. Teagle for her kind offer and told her that perhaps she was right, that she and Mr. Burbank would try to speak more distinctly, and if things didn't improve, within the week they might join the speech classes. Mrs. Teagle said, "Glad to be of help any time, Mrs. Burbank," and hung up. That night, when Mr. Burbank came home, she told him about calling Mrs. Teagle and told him that she thought that from now on they should both try to speak more carefully so that their poor little children could understand them. That night at dinner, Mr. Burbank announced in a very loud voice, "Please pass the butter." The children all exchanged glances and whispers, then laughed. The butter remained cool and comfortable on its little plate in front of Darcy. Mr. Burbank looked accusingly at Mrs. Burbank. She said in a high, unnatural voice, "Children, listen to me. Please pass your father the butter." "Oh," said Darcy, "did you say pass the butter? I thought you said fleas, gasp, and mutter." Allison said, "I thought you said he's Pa's mother." Barb said, "I thought you said freeze Pat's brother." Mr. Burbank said in a low, grim voice, "I said, please pass the butter." Darcy passed it to him with a beaming smile. The next morning after breakfast, Mr. Burbank called from upstairs, "Where's my briefcase? Anybody seen my briefcase?" Allison said, "Who's got a thief's face?" Darcy said, "Beef paste? What do you want that for?" Barb said, "Leaf race. I thought he said leaf race." They all laughed loudly and did not look for the briefcase. They could hear their mother and father banging doors and scuffling around upstairs, but they were so busy thought-you-setting they didn't even notice that Barb was standing in front of the briefcase, which was leaning against the radiator in the front hall. Finally, Mr. Burbank came running downstairs, wild-eyed and almost too late for his bus. He called to Mrs. Burbank, "If you find it, dear, bring it right down to the office. I must have it this morning." He slammed the front door and ran like the wind for his bus. Mrs. Burbank was giving the children their final inspection before school when she saw the briefcase leaning against the wall right behind Bard's fat little legs. She said, "Why, children, why didn't you tell Daddy his briefcase was down here? You must have seen it. Now I'll have to make a special trip all the way down to take it to him. Why didn't you tell him?" She looked sternly at her three children. Allison said, "Briefcase? I didn't know that's what he wanted. I thought he said thief's face." Darcy said, "I didn't know he wanted his briefcase. I thought he said beef paste." Bard said, "I thought he said leaf race." Mrs. Burbank said, "You know perfectly well that Daddy wouldn't talk about a thief's face, beef paste, or leaf races. That's just nonsense, and I'm getting good and tired of all this thought-you-said business." She sent them off to school with a little push and without a kiss. But the thought-you-said-itis continued all the rest of that week. By Friday morning, Mr. and Mrs. Burbank were so irritable they didn't even want to come downstairs and eat breakfast with the thought-you-saiders. They tried to solve the problem by not speaking to the children, but of course the telephone rang, and Mrs. Burbank said to Allison, "Answer the phone." And Allison didn't move, and her father said, "Answer the phone." And Allison said, "Oh, answer the phone. I thought you said this ham's got a bone." And Darcy said, "I thought you said the dancers are home." And Bart said, "I thought you said, the jam's all alone." It was the last straw. Mr. Burbank said, "This nonsense has got to stop now. I'm not going to eat another meal with the thought-you-saids." As soon as the children had left for school, and even before she washed the breakfast dishes, Mrs. Burbank decided that she must do something about the thought-you-saiders. She poured herself another cup of coffee and sat down at the breakfast table and thought and thought. Old Boy, the dog, came and sat beside her, and she gave him a small piece of ham and stroked his head and wondered what to do. She was just going to call Mr. Burbank's mother when the telephone rang again. Mrs. Burbank answered it. It was Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle, and she wanted the children to come for tea. Mrs. Burbank said, "Oh, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle, I'm so delighted that you called. I was just sitting here at the breakfast table wondering what in the world to do." And so she told Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle about the thought-you-saiders. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle said, "There is a regular epidemic of thought-you-said-itis all over town. It really is a very harmless disease that can be most annoying to parents, especially when they are trying to hurry. I have suffered with it myself this past week. Put on your shoes is thought-you-said sat on a fuse. Get me a tack is thought-you-said butter a cracker, and on and on. Fortunately, the cure is very simple. I have a magic powder which you sprinkle in the children's ears tonight. It will make their hearing so keen that they'll be able to hear spiders stamping across the floor, leaves crashing to the ground, flowers snapping open their petals, and fireflies striking the matches that light their lanterns. I must warn you that tomorrow, when the children are wearing the magic hearing powder, you mustn't pop corn, run the vacuum cleaner, or serve dry, crunchy breakfast foods. The noise would be too painful to them. I'll send the powder over when the children stop by after school. You might lend a little to Marilyn's mother. Goodbye and good luck." Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle hung up the phone. After school, the children came rushing in to deliver the package from Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle and to change their clothes. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle's package contained a tiny little box of white powder. Mrs. Burbank felt the powder and smelled it. It felt like talcum powder, and it smelled like ginger. She put it under the pile of clean handkerchiefs in her handkerchief box. That evening, after the children were in bed, she told Mr. Burbank about it. He thought the magic powder sounded wonderful and decided to try a little in his own ears. Mrs. Burbank went up and got the bottle, and Mr. Burbank put a pinch in his left ear. Immediately he shouted, "Turn off that terrible radio! It's killing me!" Mrs. Burbank rushed and turned the radio off. Mr. Burbank said, "It's thundering. We must be going to have a storm." Mrs. Burbank listened. She couldn't hear any thunder. She opened the front door and went out and looked at the sky. It was a clear, dark blue and spangled with stars. The night was as still and quiet as a picture. Mr. Burbank shouted, "The storm's getting closer! Almost overhead now." Mrs. Burbank came in and closed the door. She said, "Bernard Burbank, it's a cold, clear, perfectly peaceful night. There is no thunder." Mr. Burbank said, "Listen, don't you hear it? Deafening, that's what it is. Deafening." Mrs. Burbank listened very carefully. Then she heard from the kitchen a soft, very faint thumping noise. She went out to investigate and found Old Boy the dog lying under the kitchen table, scratching and bumping his elbow on the floor. She gave Old Boy a dog biscuit and put him out. Then she went back to the living room and asked Mr. Burbank if the storm had passed over. He said, "Do you have to stamp your feet like that? You certainly must be getting fat. You sound like a coal truck when you walk." Mrs. Burbank, who was very slight, looked down at her soft red house slippers and said, "Bernard, I think you had better wash that magic powder out of your ear, because I'm going to go out right now and get some graham crackers and think of the torture you'll go through if I drop a crumb." Mr. Burbank said, "Stop shouting." Mrs. Burbank said, "I'm whispering, dear." So Mr. Burbank went upstairs to wash out his ear. When he snapped on the light in the bathroom, he flinched because it sounded like Niagara Falls. And when he accidentally brushed a hairpin off the windowsill, it sounded like a huge iron chain crashing to the tiled floor. Mr. Burbank filled the bathroom glass with warm water. He had decided that that would be the best way to wash out the magic powder, and was just about to pour some in his ear when from behind the bathtub he heard the most awful screaming, screeching, whining noise. He straightened up, put down the glass, and peered over by the bathtub. He didn't see anything. He bent down over the basin again and picked up the glass. He was just about to pour the warm water in his ear when the horrible, screaming, squealing noise came again. This time right by his head. Mr. Burbank was so scared he dropped the glass, spilled the water, and banged his head on the faucet. He looked all around, but he couldn't see anything. The noise came again, this time a little fainter, and from behind the Venetian blind. He raised the blind and looked carefully. He couldn't see a thing. The terrible noise came again, this time by the mirror. Then Mr. Burbank saw what it was. A big mosquito. He grabbed a washcloth and, without thinking of his magic hearing, swatted the mosquito. The screams of agony that immediately filled the bathroom were horrible. Mr. Burbank hurriedly turned on the warm water and stuck his ear right under the faucet. Whew! What a relief! He picked the dead mosquito up by one leg and put it in the wastebasket. Then he called to Mrs. Burbank. "Hey, Mary, I'm all right now, but I think we'd better go easy with that magic powder in the children's ears. It's awfully strong." Mrs. Burbank said, "Perhaps you use too much. Here, I'll measure it out. I'll use a toothpick and I'll just put a grain or so in the right ear of each child. Come on now, help me." They tiptoed into the children's rooms and put a toothpick full of the magic powder in each one's right ear. Even in his sleep, Darcy was saying, "Miss Anderson, I didn't hear you say, 'Hand me that ruler.' I thought you said, 'Bananas are cooler.'" Mr. and Mrs. Burbank looked at their sleeping son and then at each other. "Just wait until tomorrow, Darcy, old boy," said Mr. Burbank. The next morning at 7 o'clock, Bard came running into his parents' room and said, "Mother, Daddy, there is a terrible noise in our room. It sounds like sawing." Mr. and Mrs. Burbank got out of bed, put on their robes, and went in to investigate. They couldn't hear a thing. Darcy said, "Isn't that an awful noise, Daddy? Do you think it's a buzz bomb?" Mr. and Mrs. Burbank looked and looked, but they couldn't see or hear anything. Mr. Burbank told the children to get dressed and come down to breakfast. Bard began to cry. He said, "We'll come down, Daddy, but you don't have to yell at us." Mr. Burbank said in a very quiet whisper, "Your hearing must be very good this morning. I didn't yell. In fact, I almost whispered." Then he said, "Exactly where is the buzzing noise coming from, Darcy? Listen carefully and tell me." Darcy said, "Right there by the curtain." Mr. Burbank pulled back the curtain and found a very small fly buzzing and buzzing in a corner of the window. Remembering his experience with the mosquito, he didn't dare swat the fly, so he opened the window, unlatched the screen, and pushed the fly off the windowsill. It flew happily away. Darcy said, "Daddy, I can't stand this awful crunching noise my shoelaces make when I push them through the holes. It sounds like bones breaking." Mr. Burbank said, "Here, I have an idea." He tied his handkerchief around Darcy's head like a bandage. "This'll fix it," he said softly. "Whistle biscuit," Darcy said. "I thought you said whistle biscuit." His father jerked the handkerchief off and said, "Hurry down to breakfast." At breakfast, Allison said, "Oh, Mother, I can't stand the sound of you buttering that toast. It sounds like hoeing on cement." Bard said, "Hoeing on cement? I thought you said, he took a spoonful of oatmeal and never finished the sentence. A piece of toast popped out of the toaster. All three children jumped. Darcy said, "Mother, you should warn us when you're going to make so much noise." Mrs. Burbank said, "I'm sorry, but it didn't seem loud to me. I guess my ears aren't very good." Allison said, "Come on, boys, let's go to school." Darcy said, "I thought you said poison. I don't know what I meant." Allison said, "Old boy's breathing so loud I can't hear a thing. And does he have to splash his tongue around in his mouth like that, Mother?" Mrs. Burbank called old boy and gave him a piece of bacon. He snapped and gulped, and all three children jumped and shuddered. "What a noise," said Allison, glaring balefully at poor old boy. "He's just like some terrible kind of a jungle beast." Mrs. Burbank said, "Come, children, put on your coats and go to school." Allison said, "Spit on your coats. I thought you said spit on your coats." Nobody laughed. Darcy said, "Don't talk so loud, Allison. It hurts my ears." Bard said, "Didn't you hear what Mother said? She didn't say spit on your coats. She said put on your coats." Allison said, I know it. I can hear. Let's go." The front door closed quietly, and Mrs. Burbank said to her husband, who was groping for the sugar, "That's the first time in 5 years they haven't banged the front door. Here's the sugar, dear, and you have 4 minutes before the next bus." Just then the front door opened, and the three children came crying into the house. Allison said, "Mother, we just can't stand it. The sidewalk is covered with leaves, and when we walk through them, the noise is so dreadful we just can't bear it. It sounds like hundreds of giants chopping wood." Bard said, "It sounds like millions of paper bags." Darcy said, "It sounds like thousands of houses burning up. Crackle, crackle, crash." Mrs. Burbank said, "Well, Bernard, I think we'd better wash out their ears, and we'll give Mrs. Pigglewiggle our heartiest thanks." Mr. Burbank said, "What's she done wrong?" "Who?" said Mrs. Burbank. "Mrs. Pigglewiggle," said Mr. Burbank. "What are you talking about?" said Mrs. Burbank. I said that we should give Mrs. Pigglewiggle our heartiest thanks." "Oh," said Mr. Burbank, "I thought you said, go give Mrs. Pigglewiggle your hardest thanks." The children looked disgusted. Well, what do you think about that cure? The Thought You Setter's Cure. That was an interesting chapter. Until next time.